Women have been giving birth for centuries, so it's a pretty natural experience, right? Wrong. I'm Stephanie King, professional doula, childbirth educator, and the creator of the My Essential Birth course, the online childbirth education course that's helping women everywhere confidently achieve their best birth. Today's culture would have us think that birth should be treated like an illness or an emergency, and that most of us need other people telling us what's best for our bodies because we aren't the experts. So sit tight, because if you're tuning into this podcast, you'll probably start to believe in your body, your intuition, and find yourself empowered and confident to do what it takes to have the birth of your dreams. If you like listening to me take you through these weekly topics step by step, then you're going to love the My Essential Birth course. Make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast, and definitely head over to myessentialbirth.com for the free downloads mentioned right here in these episodes, and to join the birth course and community full of pregnant moms just like you. I have to add a disclaimer that I am not a medical professional and I cannot provide medical advice. All of the information expressed in this podcast are based off of personal, professional, and educational experiences and are my own opinions. Please work with a provider you trust for medical advice during your pregnancy and birth. All right, this week's reviewer of the week is Allie Bacon, and she says, best pregnancy podcast. I'm so happy I have found this podcast. I'm 35, pregnant with my third baby. This is most likely our last baby, so I wanted things to be different. I really wanted a natural, unmedicated birth this time. This podcast has given me so much information and confidence in myself and decisions. When I learned I was pregnant, I went back and listened to all the episodes. I really love all the different points of view. I'm going to be 40 weeks on Thursday and can't wait to put what I have learned to use and meet my baby boy. Thank you so much for the confidence in myself and body. And this was actually a very recent review, so I'm super anxious to hear. Allie, you're going to have to check back in with me and tell me all about your birth story and how it went. I absolutely love that you have this beautiful third baby birth in mind and that you're doing everything in your ability to be able to have the birth that you want. So good luck, and maybe a really quick congratulations, and definitely reach out when you have that birth story. All right, today is another special day because I have another birth story for you guys, and I am so excited to hear from Anne. Originally, when I started doing these, I wanted to have a chat with everybody before we had the actual podcast interview. But then I quickly realized, no, they're you guys are telling all of the good stuff that I want people to hear, to me. And then it's awkward repeating that exact thing again when we're talking in the podcast. So it's kind of funny because, Anne, you had even asked me, wait, was I supposed to set up this discovery call? And the answer is yes. But I was like, no, we're going to go this way. We're just going to talk it through so that everybody gets the very best from the beginning. So welcome, Anne. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm really excited to have you here today. I can't wait to hear all about it. Just like I had shared before, I used to want to talk to the ladies, right, about their births before getting on the podcast. But then I decided, no, I want to hear all the good information directly from you, just at the same time as the listeners. So I can't wait for that. So will you just introduce yourself? Tell me a little bit about you. Is this your first pregnancy? Maybe a little bit about you and your husband. What did that look like for you guys?
Sure. So my name's Anne and my husband's name is Diamond. We met in high school, actually. So we're high school sweethearts with a lot of history in between.
Yay.
And then we got married 2 years ago, and then this was our first baby. It was my first pregnancy. We were very fortunate to get pregnant on our first try, which I feel grateful for. So.
Oh, you had shared we were having trouble with recording, so I caught the smallest amount of your birth story that people didn't hear. So you had shared, you thought this was a 2020 baby, right? You're like, no, it's taking my friends a long time to get pregnant.
Yeah.
So talk about that for a minute.
I have. Yeah, totally. I have a lot of friends and my sister that struggled with infertility. So as soon as COVID hit, I got my IUD out because I'm a very controlling person. I like to be in control of things. So COVID hit and I was like, I don't like that I have this IUD in and I can't get pregnant when I want to get pregnant. Yeah. So we got it out. And then I convinced my husband, I was like, it might take a long time for us to get pregnant. So we got to start trying now. And then he laughs all the time. And he's like, you got pregnant right off the bat.
This was your fault, yes.
It happened a little sooner than we were anticipating, but we're grateful. So
I love it. If you've heard my story at all, I got my husband to agree to try one time. And if it didn't get that one time, right after we were married, we got pregnant 10 days after we were married because I got one shot. And so I know the day. And so he's like, but if not, then you have to wait a year. And so welcome my first
Nice.
son. So yes,
That's
I relate.
awesome.
I love it.
Totally.
All right. So tell me a little bit about your pregnancy. What was it like? What did you have any weird, cravings or nausea the whole time? Or tell me about your pregnancy.
Yeah. So I think the pregnancy was like pretty textbook. I remember when I first got pregnant, I didn't know this, but like I called the doctor, was so excited, was like, I took 2 tests and they're positive. Like, what should I do?
Yeah.
And they're like, we actually don't care to see you for 12 weeks.
Yeah.
And so like, I think that part was really hard to like just be at home and like know something crazy was happening in my body and like not actually having access to like an expert.
Yeah.
But first trimester was miserable. I joked all the time that people call it morning sickness, but I'm like, I feel sick all throughout the day. So
Yeah.
it was interesting how fast and how hard all of those symptoms or things happened. It was something that I really wasn't anticipating. And then same thing, go into the second trimester, and that was like the golden period.
Yes.
Where like I felt great, I felt rested. People could start to see that I was pregnant, so I was getting some positive attention, but like I wasn't quite feeling miserable yet. And then third tri, your body is just changing and you're getting larger and everything's a little bit more uncomfortable and sleep is hard to get. So,
yeah.
I don't think anything crazy happened. There wasn't any scares. Everything was pretty, as I was reading and learning about what pregnancy should look like, I'm like, oh, cool. Like that's exactly what's happening to me. So, there was a lot of comfort in that. So
I love it. Okay, kind of walk me through your, onto your provider experience. Will you tell me a little bit about that? Did you interview a couple providers? Did you ever change providers? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so so when I made that first call, just by chance, whatever was closest, the hospital that was closest and what covered by our insurance, I called and they were like, okay, do you want to meet with the OBGYNs or the midwives? And I was like, I have no idea. So I asked for like 5 minutes and I called them back. I did a quick Google research and was like, I think the midwives sound pretty cool. Like, let's just go for that. So I just chose the midwives with so prior to getting pregnant, I just assumed I'd get an epidural. A C-section sounds nice. They just cut the baby out, like no big deal. I really didn't know anything about what, pregnancy and labor and birth was. I was just kind of going to follow what my mom and what my sisters had done. So just by chance, I had chosen to meet with the midwives. And I think it was the first appointment with them that really changed my perspective. My midwife said something like, people plan and prepare and spend so much money for their wedding.
Yes.
And then when they have a baby, everyone's just like,
whatever.
Let's just do whatever. Knowing things actually terrifies me, so maybe it's better that I don't do any research and stuff like that. And so I think that conversation with her really changed my perspective of you're right, I'm about to enter the most life-changing thing I've experienced thus far. Why wouldn't I want to know everything I possibly could about it? So after that meeting, I watched the Ricky Lake documentary.
Yes.
I read a book, How to Give Birth Like a Feminist. I feel like I kind of did all these things that a lot of people that choose unmedicated births do.
Yeah.
And then by the time I was at my second appointment, I was like, I think this is what I want to do. And then finally I found your guys' podcast. I just searched birth podcasts and tried to find ones that really focused on educating women and doing unmedicated births. And I would say after your podcast is what I would listen to every day I went on a walk and stuff. And after that, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to know everything. And I actually think choosing this unmedicated birth might not actually be as unrealistic or as crazy of an idea as I had previously thought. So
I love it. That's the goal.
Thanks
Normalize
to you,
it,
for
right?
sure. Yeah. And then it was cool too, because I feel as I learned more and more, I would always come to my appointments with questions or, a lot of times I'm lucky I didn't have the experience of having to fight with my provider because the norms that the midwives did, are very much things that you guys say we should prioritize, or like you were teaching us of like, hey, this is what doctors tend to do, but actually, you know, this might be a better way. So I feel very grateful for that. But it was funny because like the first few appointments, I like came with a list ready to fight, ready to like dig down and be like, no, like
this is what
I want you to respect like my choices. And every time they're like, yeah, no, that's the standard. Like that's what we do. If you wanted more intervention, we would do that. But they really did err on the side of
normal,
you know, being as hands-off as possible.
I love it.
Yeah, which I was super appreciated. Yeah
It's funny, that's what we say a lot, right? Like OBs are trained in surgery and in the craziness and the emergencies, and like that's what we love them for and what they're there for, and midwives are trained in normal. And I feel like that's very much the case. You know, even as a doula, you walk into birth and like I know normal really, really well. I can tell you that like this is very normal what you're experiencing. And it makes a difference because when you normalize like what feels crazy, somebody tells you like, oh, no, like totally normal, take a breath. You know, I can cope with this. You know, I don't need medication. I don't need whatever intervention. So that's awesome. I love that. Yeah. Okay, well, good. So that was your provider experience. These are midwives that birth in a hospital, or were you at a birth center or home?
Yeah, so they're at a hospital, which I think was really perfect for my first birth because I felt comforted by not stepping too far away from what has been popularized, while they still have the philosophy very much of the hands off.
Yeah.
So
that's perfect. I love it. So with your this midwife, was it like a practice? Were there several that you met? Did you just have the one?
Yeah, so there are 7 midwives, and you make your appointment, and it's just by chance who's working that day and who you get to see. And same thing with the birth. It's just whenever the baby comes, you get whoever's on call that day. But they did a really great job of, I don't know if they were taking really extensive notes or whatever, but it just really flowed that like if I saw one midwife for one appointment and then the next one, they just picked it up right where I left off with the other one, which really
that's nice.
Made me feel good that by the end, when I was getting close to birth, I was like, okay, whoever's there, I was fortunate to have met all of them. Yeah. And I trusted all of them.
And they knew your story kind of from what you're saying. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Like what mattered to you. So were you comfortable with literally any of them that would have come in to help you give birth?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely had some that I like felt like I jived with a little bit more. And I was lucky that I got one that I really liked. But yeah, all of the ones that I had met, I was like, cool. Like if you're there in this crazy circumstance, like I will trust you and be able to do it. So
I love it. That's so cool. Okay, so tell me a little bit about your partner, your husband. What was it like for him? Were you kind of dragging him along? Was he kind of gung-ho about birth from the beginning? What did it look like for him to support you?
Yeah, he's really good. He just kind of followed my lead and was very much like, it's your body, your choice, like however you want to do this, I support you.
Love it.
And I think it was really nice to have, we did take your course, and I think it was nice to have that something formal for us to sit down and do. I'd like send him podcasts, and I don't know if he actually listened to like all the ones, or like, you know, he didn't have all the information that I was getting, but it was nice to have your course to go so he could kind of like understand the background and see like what his role would be in that as well. But yeah, he wasn't dragging his feet. He was totally interested and invested, which was really super important, I think.
Totally. Do you think that there were things that you did with the birth course, or just as you were preparing to go into this labor part of life here, that you guys did really well together, or that you did a lot of that you feel like was really beneficial?
I think a lot. I think the course mainly gave us tools of communication.
Excellent.
Which was cool, or like words to like how to describe like what was going on. I think there's only so much, I don't know, and we're still struggling with this in terms of like hormones and what's going on in my body that you like can't physically see. I think the course was like good for him to be able to see like, okay, this is actually going on with everyone that experiences pregnancy and birth. And so I think that was like the biggest thing. We obviously did all of your stretches and stuff. That helped. And in terms of prepping for birth, we practiced positioning and compressions and things like that, which was also, I think for him, it was really nice to have something physical for him to do, not just like this grand idea of like what it might be like when we do there, but like here's something that we can actually practice day to day so that we're ready when it comes.
That's awesome. I love to hear that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the birth then. So take me from the very beginning stages of your birth all the way through to the end. Tell me, I love to ask this question because I think moms just love to know, and they ask all the time, right? Like, what do contractions feel like? What does that actually feel like? So start with like the very first little tiny signs of like, this might be labor, and walk me through your birth.
Yeah. Yeah, so I actually loved our labor. So again, because it was COVID, my parents live out of town, and we made them quarantine for 14 days, and then they came about a week early so that they could be here. I had my mom stand in as my doula since I could only have 2 visitors in the hospital. Awesome. But early labor was just interesting because we don't live in a big house, and like my husband was home, my parents were here, so it kind of like felt crammed. But I just have these like really beautiful memories of like playing phase 10 and playing dominoes with my parents, and like having to pause every now and then while I work through contractions. Which felt very special. Or like, so I started contractions on a Monday, like Monday morning-ish. I was going on a walk with my parents, and I was like, oh, I think this is it. Like, I think it might be starting. And those contractions felt very similar to like period cramps. They weren't, I mean, as you guys described, they weren't anything like major. They did stop me in my tracks, but I could still, you know, I could walk them out and breathe through them, and they were totally fine. So that was super exciting. So that happened all through Monday and all through Monday night. They wouldn't be like, there wasn't really a pattern to them, but they were pretty consistent in terms of like they were occurring a couple times every hour. So then Tuesday, kind of nothing had changed, still going through some contractions. By Tuesday afternoon, I have a really good friend who's a doula, so I called her and I was like, hey, what's going on? Like, this is, you know, it's been like 24 hours of like some type of labor, but like nothing's really progressing. And she was just like, oh, like, I think that just sometimes happens. I think you're maybe in prodromal labor. You know, just keep waiting it out. It'll happen when it happens. And then by Wednesday, kind of the same thing. They've picked up a little bit in intensity. And my dad jokes, he thinks I did too much research on what labor should look like, because I was very much looking for that, like, the pattern, right, of like contractions last this long, they're this far apart, and then they like keep going and going. And it would happen, like the pattern would happen a little bit, and then it, like something would change and it wouldn't, you know, and I'm just like, I don't know what's going on. And so I think it was by Wednesday evening or afternoon, I was just so exhausted after 2 days of like the anticipation, not getting really good sleep.
I ended up mental, emotional part of it is like so draining. Like, am I in labor? Am I not in labor?
Yeah, no, totally. And like feeling like you're so close, but then it's like feels forever away too.
Yeah.
But they ended up picking up in intensity and like were way more painful. So I knew something was going on. I ended up messaging you guys on Facebook actually.
Yeah,
I could cry because it like really saved my mental health, I think, during this process. And being able to say like, hey, this is what is going on. And you guys messaged back and you were like, hey, I think it might be a positioning thing. Try these things. Like, you're so close. And like, you know, but just, I don't know, just normalizing like what was going on. Like, there wasn't anything serious, nothing to be concerned about. Just like, yeah, this is what happens sometimes, I think really helped. By like 7 p.m. that night, they were so painful, but they were not happening, you know, like it wasn't happening over and over and over again. It'd be like super painful and then a break.
Yeah.
So I called my midwife and just cried, and I was like, this is like, I've been recording, this is what I'm seeing, like, what do you think? And she's just like, yeah, I think you're right. Like, it's not time for you to come in. And that like really broke me. I was like, like I just wanted her to tell me like the baby's coming and you need to come right in. But she said, but keep watching it, and if your water breaks, call me and we'll have you come in. And I'm like, okay, cool. And then a few hours later, I was trying to get some sleep, and a gush of water just came out in one of these contractions, and I was like, it's here.
Something's happening.
And again, I think, I just like the education I got through you guys and like reading all that I could, like really made me feel, both me and my husband, like so excited when it was happening. I think had we not, this would have been a very fearful moment. And like, instead it's like, oh, my water just broke all over my bed, and like we're stoked and like going downstairs ready to pack the car and get the show on the road.
Love it.
Which I think is just so nice to be able to have that experience for my first birth. So we packed the car, we drive to the hospital. Of course it was snowing.
Of course.
You know, it was icy on the roads, whatever.
Right.
So we get to the hospital. And again, I think I did too much research because I was like there and I was like, did I come at the right time? The nurse that was checking me in, she was like, of course you're here at the right time. Like, you're here. You're supposed to be here. Like, we're all good. And I'm like freaking out of like, did I do the calculations right? So we get to the hospital. I check in. The midwife that was there was actually the midwife that was at our last appointment. And I just super loved her. At our last appointment, she ended our appointment. She's Jewish, with like a Jewish saying. I think it's Shah Tova, which just means in the right time. And that was kind of the phrase that I held on to for those like few days after my last appointment until contractions started going on. And that really helped. It was, I just felt like it was such a blessing that she was there. I was also lucky that she was training a new midwife. So there were actually 2 midwives that night, which means I had one of them in my room at the whole time.
That's really cool.
Which felt like I had, I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't have a doula, but now I have 2 midwives. So that feels great. And then once we got to the hospital, things moved really fast, which again, that was one of my goals. I wanted to labor at home as long as possible. Because I mentally, I'm like, I don't know how long I can be in a hospital and know that I could have medication and not be there. So we got there, and my mom and my husband were in the room. And you guys joke about this too with transition and like the moment the woman just undresses and like, becomes very animalistic. That is like, as soon as we got into the labor and delivery room, I stripped down. I asked them to fill the tub, and I just like went in there and did my thing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, yeah.
So did you give birth in the tub?
So that was just like the tub that they have in the hospital room. And then I did end up having a water birth. So I labored in there for a little bit while they were setting up the birthing tub. And then as soon as that was ready, I moved in there, and just started working through my contractions. As soon as I got into the hospital, they were like coming kind of with like no stop. I didn't really feel like I had that break anymore. And it's interesting because I think I was farther along than I thought I was. Cause I was like breathing through and like telling myself, okay, you'll get a break, just work through this contraction. Like, here's the peak, you're going downhill, it'll be a break. And then it's like another one would come and I'd be like, what? Like, this isn't
supposed to get my break.
How it's supposed to be, or like where I thought I was. Yeah. But it was great. And my midwives were really great. They like checked my dilation when I got there. And they said if I ever wanted to be checked again, that they totally would. But I remember there was a point where I felt like I wanted to know the numbers, because I thought that might help me just mentally. And I asked, and I was like, do you think you can check my dilation again? And my midwife was like, I could, but then like you have to get out of the tub and blah, blah, blah. But I think you're really close. Like, why don't you actually put your hand down there and like feel? And I did that, and I could feel his head. And I was like, I really appreciate that they, they really empowered me to like make the choices instead of like rely on their advice or what they were saying. There was also a moment where I asked them, I'm like, okay, what's next? Like, should I start pushing or what? Like, it really hurts. The contractions are coming. So like, is now the time to push? And they were just like, sometimes it looks like this for women. Sometimes it looks like this for women. But really, you just kind of got to do what feels right for you. And I think again, like I had only been in the hospital for a couple of hours, and I'm like, I think it's time to push. Like, I think that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And they were just like, great, like, let's do it. And I thought it was, I remember at the moment being really annoyed that they weren't giving me directives. I'm like, just tell me what to do. Like, you guys are the experts. Yes. Tell me what I need to do. But I think afterwards, I felt really grateful that they were just kind of like overseers and were encouraging me to like trust my body and that my body was going to do what it needed to do.
Yeah. So, oh, that's neat. I think when you give power back to a woman, especially in that sacred space, I mean, it stays with you forever. You know, we always talk about like, what do you remember about your birth? Well, it's not like what time exactly everything happened. It's how I felt, how I was treated, how I was supported when I look back. And so that's really neat. I mean, how special, how many women get to say that, like, not only did they have the opportunity to, but their provider said, go ahead and take a feel, like, see how close you are. And how neat and energizing that must have been to be like, oh my gosh, like, my baby's almost here. This is happening. Or even like the pushing, you know, like, well, push. Does it feel better to push, or does it, you know, that's up to you, instead of being like, well, wait, let's make sure. I love that. Love it. So I want to take you back to the beginning a little bit. You talked about your contractions feeling like period cramps. So were these like down low, like in the lower abdomen? Were you feeling them in your back? Was it all over your belly? What did it feel like? Do you remember?
Yeah, I would say it was low and definitely in the back, which is how my period cramps present as back pain as well. So that felt a little familiar. Yeah.
Okay, and then as you worked through those, I mean, you had some prodromal labor that's very real, and you talked about some different things that even we had recommended for you to do, like different positional things and whatnot. What were you doing during those contractions that made them better for you? And if your husband or partner was involved at all, what did that look like having him there?
Yeah, so we definitely used hip compressions. That was really helpful. I like have a memory of like always needing to kind of be like in that slouched position where like gravity was kind of pulling my belly down a little bit. That was really helpful. And I think it was just like taking the time and pausing and breathing. I'm not a very spiritual person, so I didn't like resonate with the like, I don't like the affirmation thing, and like that kind of just feels so cheesy to me. And I used, I think, you know, anybody can give birth this way if that's what they want to do. But I think it was really like honing in on my breathing and just kind of like being present and, again, like normalizing, like this is good pain. This means your baby's on the way, which I guess is an affirmation, right? But in my head, thinking that, you know, I don't know.
That's fine. I love it. Great. And then you kind of talked about your providers and how important that was for them as you went through it. I assume your husband was with you the whole time, and just was it helpful to have him, especially like in the water? I don't know if he was in the water. I know some men get into the water, but if he was or wasn't, maybe talk about that and what he did while you were in there that still provided you comfort if maybe it wasn't so hands-on.
Yeah, so my husband didn't get in the water with me, but he was on the side, rubbing my arm, rubbing my back, scratching my head throughout the whole process. And he was just like really, really positive. We talked a lot prior to the birth about what that might look like for him. He was like, I don't know if it's going to like freak me out to see you in this pain, or, you know, like if I'm going to shut down or anything. But he like, I feel like he very much came alive. And I just remember, you know, I don't remember exactly how things happened, but like my memory of him was just like, he was so positive, so in awe. Like I could tell that he was like so amazed by what was going on. And just like not weirded out by anything. Like like I just like feel his really positive energy, which I think was the most helpful because I was going through a lot of pain, you know?
Yeah. I know a lot of it happens inside, right? We're not verbalizing or talking about everything like we're in a different place while we're in labor, but just like you said, having the support around you and then the positivity that you were feeling from him, like that's very real, and it does like shape how the birth can go. So that's really awesome. Will you maybe take a few minutes and just talk about your postpartum experience? So was that like pretty easy for you? Did you feel all the loves right away? Did it take you a while to connect to baby? What did that look like?
So postpartum, so right after I gave birth, I remember like everyone always tells you, oh, as soon as the baby's out, like, you're not even going to remember how painful anything was, and you're just going to be filled with love. And I was really excited for that moment. Yeah. I gotta say, as soon as he was out, my first thought was like, when can I go to sleep? Like, I am so tired. Like, I love this baby. It's so nice to have him on my chest, but like, I need to go to bed.
Yeah.
So that was my first experience, and I guess I just laugh at that. I'm like, I guess that's probably, 3 days of no sleep leading into this. That's probably a pretty normal reaction. We did do, like, delayed cord clamping, the golden hour right off the bat, and that was really great. He latched really easily. So I think the connection was really there. I'm also somebody that, like, I've been looking forward to being a mom my whole life, so I wasn't necessarily worried about anything like that. However, with postpartum, I do think, and maybe this was because I was so focused on the birth during my pregnancy, that I just, like, didn't do research on what postpartum was going to be like. Yeah. And I do think it was, like, a lot harder than I was anticipating.
In what ways?
I don't know.
Just felt.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
I was saying, in what ways? In what ways would you say it was harder postpartum?
I think, like, hormonally, I think by the time I was having birth, I was, like, ready for my hormones to go back and, like, me to feel like a normal person. And I think I was not, and I think maybe the sleep deprivation, you don't understand until you actually go through it, what that's like.
Yes.
So I don't know. And then even, I don't know, like, the stitching afterwards and just, like, the hospital we ended up having to stay in the hospital for 2 nights because I tested positive for GBS. Okay. And I birthed so fast that they weren't able to get both rounds of
antibiotics,
the antibody. So, like, that was miserable. Like, being in the hospital just, like, isn't fun.
Yeah.
So I think that was also, like, really hard to just be, like, woken up all the time, like, people taking your baby and making him cry, and you're like, but I don't know.
Yes.
It just, like, wasn't a fun time. And then I think the weeks after, I don't know. I think maybe I just wasn't anticipating, and maybe it's because I thought I was so ready to be a mom that it would just, like, come easy and life would be great once the baby was here. So I didn't really focus on preparing for that. But I don't know, like, having to change your pad all the time and, like, having to go to the bathroom with stitches and, like, I don't know. It's just, like, a very uncomfortable time while you're also stressing about this tiny little baby.
Yeah, it's really true. There's no preparing for it. And I mean, there is, right? But there's no really, just like you said, like, you don't realize what it is until you're in it. And so it can be a little tricky, especially that first time, just the first pregnancy, the first birth, the first postpartum. You're like, I haven't done this before. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So how long did it take you to maybe feel normal again or like yourself?
I would say it wasn't until, like, the 6-week appointment. I think that's when I had the realization of, like, okay, yes, I'm in charge of this baby, and also I can have my own life. Yeah. I think it was 6 weeks where I was like, okay, I think I'm going to leave him with Diamond for a little bit, and I'm going to go do something by myself that isn't, like, grocery shopping or isn't, like, going out and buying a baby thing. Like, I'm going to go do something just for myself. And I think it wasn't until then when I, like, could separate myself and the baby a little bit in my mind that I didn't start to feel a little bit normal.
Yeah. I love that you shared that too, because that is a big deal. Like, I don't know how long it took me to realize that, like, no, I need to not go to the grocery store. Like, I need to not be on somebody else's, like, agenda task. Like, I just need to be by myself.
Right.
So that's awesome. I love that you shared that.
Right.
My phone is going off now. Okay. Lastly, I would love if you would just share kind of, like, your best advice for husbands or partners and best advice for moms. Just kind of that final note.
Totally. So I asked my husband, since he couldn't be here today, how he felt that went. And he felt he wasn't prepared, and this might just be a me problem, but he wasn't prepared of, like, how hormones affect my mood and my emotions. Yeah. And I think maybe I know I need to work on being a little bit better with that, but he was like, during the pregnancy, my wife was a different person. During postpartum, my wife is still a different person, and just like getting used to that. And like, so I think my advice for partners is like, give grace. I think there's like so much going on in your partner's body that you can't see and you don't understand. And she doesn't know how to communicate well specifically about it. That like, I don't know. I just feel like give grace to your partner, because there's so much going on. Even you can see physically her body growing, but like I think there is so much like emotional and mental exhaustion that we put on ourselves.
Yeah, I love that advice. My husband would agree with him completely. Like he'd be on the same, and we've talked about that. It took us 3 babies, like that 3rd pregnancy, to get it right. So I hope, you guys get it quicker. But I totally agree with that. So I love that you shared that. Well, I love listening to your birth story. I'm so glad that you were willing to come on the podcast with me and share with myself, but also all the women that are going to be able to listen to this and benefit from it. So thank you so much for your time and your story. That's it for this week, but make sure you subscribe to the podcast so that you get notifications first as I drop a new episode every week. And don't forget to head over to myessentialbirth.com for all of the free downloads mentioned here, and to join the birth course and community serving pregnant moms just like you. If you enjoyed this and other episodes, I would love it if you would take a few minutes to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I read every single one and include one at the beginning of each episode. See you next week.